All right, so thank you everyone for tuning in to today's virtual hike. Today I'll be leading you through a hike in Douglas Park, Chicago. My name is Carmina Reyes. I'm an Indigenous woman, a digital artist, a dancer, an earth tender, and I'm an alumni for the Student Conservation Association's Women's Crew. I currently work for the Forest Preserves of Cook County under a nonprofit called Friends of the Forest Preserves, where I'm a restoration technician, all thanks to the skills that I learned during my time with the SEA. And as I said, today I'll be giving you a guided hike as an Indigenous person, and I'll be sharing some Indigenous plant knowledge and some folklore that has been passed down to me through generations. Before I continue on with today's hike, I wanted to dedicate this time to do a land acknowledgement and acknowledge whose ancestral homelands Chicago and our beautiful Douglas Park are sitting on. Um, Chicago, also known as Chicago, sits on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Council of the Three Fires, Ojibwe, Odawa, the Potawatomi, Peoria, and the Kickapoo. We must be mindful that we participate in the continuous removal of Indigenous people from their homelands, that we knowingly and unknowingly participate in the destruction of Indigenous lands, that includes the introduction of non-native species and the continual use of chemical herbicides. We must acknowledge that land restoration and conservation is not possible without the knowledge of Indigenous people that have tended and evolved with the land over thousands of years. And we must acknowledge that Chicago is home to over 75,000 American Indians today who continue to share their Indigenous plant knowledge, practice their culture, and harvest their food and plant medicines that are native to this region. Thank you again for tuning into their virtual hike. I'll be including a link for the mapping native lands again, and just sharing that resource once again. So if you want to see that, it will be down in the chat. And we can continue on with our hike. Douglas Park is located in the North Lawndale neighborhood, and it's one of the largest natural areas in this part of the city. And it's important not just for the migratory birds and the pollinators that depend on this ecosystem, but also important for the wellness of the surrounding community. And I grew up about a 10-minute hike, about a 10-minute walk from this park. And growing up here, there's very little green space besides trees that are planted in the sidewalk. So growing up in this area, my first relationship with nature was through dance and Indigenous folklore. Um, Folk dancing fosters an appreciation for nature. And a lot of Indigenous folk dances have direct ties with this relationship that we have with nature. A lot of dances, through their dance steps and their movements, they teach us how to harvest crops, how to sow seeds, and in some we mimic animals, and in others we even just thank Mother Earth for what we're allowed to harvest. As an example, this is a dance about harvesting quinoa. That's me on the left. And this dance teaches the entire process of the quinoa harvest, everything from the minute that the plants are sown to then later actually harvesting the mature quinoa crop and processing the seed. Um, and this is the way that Indigenous people pass their knowledge through generations. Something doesn't need to be written in a textbook or included in a lab report in order to be a valid source of knowledge. Dance is a valid source of knowledge. Embroidery is a valid source of knowledge. And folklore is a valid source of knowledge. And I hope to share some of that knowledge with you all today during our hike. While we enjoy the beautiful scenery, I just wanted to take some time to talk also about the history of this park because it was very recently changed. The name was very recently changed from Stephen Douglas Park to Frederick and Anna Douglas Park. And this is because Stephen Douglas Park was actually a slave owner. And there was a lot of community involvement into changing um, going into the name change of this park. And as you can see, this is actually a sign from this park. And if you see the last S at the end, it was actually added in by community members. So because the city wasn't really listening to the demands of the surrounding community, the community took it upon themselves to actually rename the park to honor Frederick and Anna Douglas. And okay. And since 2017, community members and youth activists have been pushing the city for this name change and hosted rallies to bring attention to this issue. And it's also important to recognize that North Lawndale is a predominantly Black community, and that the most current push for equality and justice led by the Black Lives Matter movement was what ultimately made this change to honor Frederick and Anna Douglas. As we walk through the natural area, we can see that nature is settling down and getting ready for dormancy and getting ready to welcome fall. We see less blooming. As you can see, things are now seeding, and the leaves of trees are changing colors, and our days are getting shorter. And as Indigenous people, we recognize this and know that this is a time for rest, it's a time for fasting, and it's a time to go within, just like nature is reciting. What we do, our productivity, and what we celebrate is synchronized with the cycles of nature. And as we welcome fall, we begin to celebrate La Gran Fiesta de los Muertos, or the Grand Festival of the Dead, where we honor our departed and their journey through Mictlan, or the afterlife. We honor the cycles of life and death, just as we see in the plants here, as the mother plants begin their dormancy and have reached their maturity. You know, they're seeding, and their seeds are getting ready for life when spring comes back around again. And here I'm showing our Illinois bundle flower. Earlier I was showing some seeds from this native indigenous plant. And we can also see that some of our goldenrods are also starting to seed, and there are late blooming flowers. Here I am showing the bundle flower again. And in the back you could kind of see some gray-headed coneflowers also starting to seed too. And in the back you can see the Douglas Park field house. Here we have a milkweed plant. The milkweed plant is known as the host plant for monarch butterflies. The monarch butterfly depends on this plant for its entire life cycle. And every year during this time, the monarch butterfly migrates to the south to overwinter. And some reach all the way to Mexico and the state of Michoacan, where my family is from. The migration is synchronized with the Grand Festival of the Dead, because when they reach Mexico is at the start of the celebration. So it's believed that the monarchs are the souls of the departed, coming to visit their loved ones every year. And in the story of the afterlife, a person's soul must face many trials throughout their journey in the underworld. And we can see that direct relationship with monarchs and their long journey to overwinter. And here I'm just showing what the seed looks like for the milkweed plant. And here I'm just showing some more late blooming flowers. They'll be the last food source for pollinators. And so that's why it's so important to have different things blooming at different times. Here I'm just showing some asters, and the yellow flower there is the Canada goldenrod. And although we might not recognize it, there is an abundance of food here. And here we have some chocomeca or grapevine, an indigenous food source. And as you can see, it's not only a food source for us, but as you can see the leaves, something's also been eating this. So it's also a food source for other insects and other wildlife that live here. And something important to note when foraging is that there are a lot of lookalikes. In particular, there's a lookalike to grapevine called moonseed that is very toxic. So it's important when foraging that that you're very confident in your plant ID skills.
Mhm.
And here I'm showing some more grapevine. Here we're coming up on another indigenous food source, chapulinas or grasshoppers. Entomophagy is the practice of eating insects, and it's a practice that's commonly found in indigenous communities. Where my family is from, we eat them in tacos, we eat them in quesadillas, and we also make them into salsas. Here we have our cattail, another food source. The rhizome for the cattail is edible, and people saute this. The flower spike before the cattail actually flowers is also edible, and the young cattail shoots are also edible. And this is the example of the cattail shoot that I was talking about, and I was trying to show a better view of the rhizome that's edible. And the pollen from the flower head can also be eaten as well. Just as there is an abundance of food, there is an abundance of medicine here. And it's important to recognize what we now know as Western medicine was founded by indigenous people, and that this knowledge was stolen from indigenous people, and that indigenous people continue to be excluded from the discussion of medicines today. Indigenous people use plant medicines to cure and care for each other. They're used during birth work, and they're used to cleanse their energies and their homes, and for rites of passage and ceremony. And as I'm walking to the pond here, you could see some frogs getting scared and jumping around. I wish you could hear the sound, but it's really cute. Here we have our native beggar's ticks. This plant was historically used to make tinctures to treat inflammation, and also used as a sedative. And now as we turn around, we're going to be coming up on some American bugleweed. I'm just showing a little bit of shots of the pond. This is the American bugleweed. It's in the mint family. It has a square stem, just characteristics of the mint family, and it also has the really small mint flowers. This herb has been historically used for thyroid disorders, and also used as a sedative. And if you crush the leaves, it gives off a really strong minty smell. And here we have our native indigenous bone set. The bone set got its name because it was used before to cure breakbone fever, which was a mosquito transmitted virus. And it has been historically used to treat colds, to relieve stomach aches, and also used as a laxative by some indigenous communities. And I'm just showing some small flowers. I'm just showing some more bonsai. And here we're going to be coming up on some blue vervain. Here it is. All right, so this is our blue vervain. It's now going into seed. It has purple flowers. And historically, the blue vervain was used to aid in respiratory conditions and used to treat headache and insomnia. We have some more blue vervain going into seed. This is our Monarda, another native plant of this region. It is also in the mint family. As you can see, it's now going into seed. It also has purple flowers. It has the square stem again, just a characteristic of the mint family. And it's historically been used to make teas to help with menstrual cramps. And here I'm showing some soil. I try to find any excuse to talk about soil, but it's important to know that so 80% of our antibiotics actually come from Streptomyces, which is a genus of soil bacteria. So it's also really important to take care of the earth, because the earth also is here to take care of us and here to cure us. And here we have a willow. Specifically, this is the narrow leaf willow tree. And the willow tree is known because this is where salicylic acid is derived from, that is commonly found in skincare products. And here we have some non-native buckthorn. The non-native buckthorn, so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to talk about non-native species and how detrimental they really are to our native ecosystem. The non-native buckthorn alters the ecosystem by releasing toxins into the soil that actually suppress the growth of other plants, so that the soil only supports the growth of other buckthorn plants, and no other plants can grow there. When it decomposes, buckthorn also decomposes very quickly, so it alters the soil composition really quickly, and that also makes it harder for other plants to be able to grow in the area where buckthorn grows. And I'm just showing some of the berries. Don't eat those, they're really toxic. And as I mentioned before, this area is heavily industrialized. There is very little green space here, and the nature here competes with their infrastructure. But we have to remember that nature is its own force. It's without mercy and has no regard for our infrastructure that we build. It's a force that can't be kept. And as you can see here, although we built this golf course here, nature is still very present. The moss is present. As you can see here, we have ants that are still present and breaking through these structures that are set in place to inhibit their survival and their growth. And as we can see here, we also have the honey locust that continues to drop its seed here and looking for a place to ground its roots. Nature is here to reclaim its space. And to be an Indigenous person, sorry, let me just pause it. So nature is here to reclaim its space. And to be an Indigenous person here today is resisting these colonial structures that are here to inhibit our survival and inhibit our growth. To be an Indigenous person here today means to resist assimilation. And to be an Indigenous person here today means to have survived generational trauma. And it means that although our culture and our history was erased and we lacked a way to ground ourselves, we are here and we are resilient as moss and resilient as ants, and we are as resilient as honey locusts. And we talked about our hike about the abundance of food and the abundance of medicines. But as we can see here, there is also an abundance of life. Here we have a caterpillar and a fly, both using the same plant. And here we'll be coming up on some milkweed in a bit. I'm just showing a goldenrod again. But here we're coming up on some milkweed. And as we can see, there are some milkweed beetles. And just like the monarch butterflies, the milkweed beetle depends on the milkweed to complete its entire life cycle. There's interspecies dependence here, and we see community here. The abundance of life is crucial in having a healthy ecosystem. And I also wanted to show an embroidery piece that is embroidered by the Otomi people, which is an indigenous group in Mexico. So as we can see here, and on this embroidery piece, we see many different kinds of animals here. We see an abundance of life here. We see different kinds of birds. There's flowers, but there's different kinds of flowers. And we see insects in this embroidery piece, but there's different kinds of insects. And so presented on this embroidery piece is biodiversity. And our knowledge of the land is passed down through generations through embroidery. And in order to protect this abundance, we have to learn how to tend for the land in a way that's responsible and that's respectful. And we have to protect food sources, such as we have to protect food sources and our water sources that this abundance depends on. And as we can see here, with the different kind of animal tracks, this abundance of life really depends on this water source that's here in Douglas Park. And that just about concludes our hike through Douglas Park. I hope you all were able to take away something that made you think about nature in a different light.